You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 352 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat? Today's
an off day, Jeremy, so it's going as well as it could.
It is an off day, a chance for us to collect our thoughts. And lots of thoughts were had after a rough week. Probably worst case scenario. Just a 2-5 week. Who saw this coming? We've got a special guest on the line to help us unpack all of the problems that are the Chicago Cubs, help us look ahead at the week that will be and decide what the rest of this season's going to look like. We're going to talk about all this stuff, and to help us unpack and deal with all of our emotions, longtime friend of the show, Matt Trueblood. Matt, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Anytime and always. I don't count as a special guest anymore, though. I've been on this too many times. I'm a special guest the way Ian Happ is a cleanup hitter.
We had to have you on this week. You wrote some fantastic stuff over at your blog. If you're not going to plug your site, because we need our listeners to go check out your latest articles there. Where can they find your work?
Northsidebaseball.com is the main one. I mean, obviously, I'm writing a few places, doing a lot of interesting things. So check me out on Twitter at MA Trueblood. But Northside Baseball, we've got a growing community of writers, and we're going to do our best to cover what is quickly becoming a mess.
You've been very prolific the last couple of days, too. I'm having a hard time keeping up.
This is why I'm telling people to go there, because the words of Matt Trueblood were prolific this week. Matt, I was very impressed with the articles there.
Nobody can call you a front runner, Matt.
I have a feeling they got some different names.
Not a bandwagon guy, that's for sure.
As we look at the time of this recording, the last place in the NL Central Chicago Cubs, let's talk about what went wrong this week. The series in San Francisco, first off, it seems like it's one of two types of games for the Cubs. They can't get hits with runners in scoring position. They can't hit for power, and then the bullpen has problems. This seems to be it's one of two scenarios. That's how the game's going to play out for them.
Could I add another nuance to that, by the way?
Yeah,
and I think it really played out in the Giants series, but then certainly in the Brewers series to follow. My friend, who's a Giants fan, who lives in Milwaukee, oddly enough, was commenting. We were going back and forth during the Giants series, just kind of trading, I won't call them barbs, but observations. He's surprised at how much the Cubs' defense has deteriorated and how their base running looks so amateurish. And I felt that they were really on full display in the Brewer series as well.
Perfect. And, yes.
And in both series, but also just over the course of the year, I feel like Cubs, as bad as the bullpen's been, and when you blow 17 saves, that's as bad as it gets. And as bad as the offense has been at times, and as bad as some hitters in our offense have been, like historically bad, they've probably also collectively, you could really pin maybe 5 or 6 losses almost entirely on if they just run the bases in a normal way, not in a bad way, or if they just made some fairly makeable defensive plays. And we can get into the guys who aren't making extraordinary plays because they're below average, but just average play. And sometimes, often, frankly, by the people who were good defensively last year. It's been a team effort on defense to sink this low. And I just felt when you watch, especially with all the close games the Cubs have been playing, that it kind of highlights itself when you lose runs on the bases or base runners. And how many times did they get multiple hits in an inning? But you're like, wait a minute, what happened? Oh yeah, we got caught stealing in between, or oh, there was a double play in between, or oh, guy got thrown out at third or at home, and then all the missed opportunities defensively on balls that weren't caught, not even errors necessarily, but just balls that could have been caught, weren't caught. And it
see Kyle Hendricks start in Milwaukee.
Yeah, right.
Example.
That's a perfect example of one. And that's sort of like the obvious one, but it seems like there are a lot more to me. And it started in game one. Like, it's been going on the entire season, even when they were winning early in the year. Remember when they would lose games? You're like, oh, they'd only fielded that ball. I'm surprised corners got 6 errors in the first 10 days. It's stuff like that. There's always stuff, the Morel stuff, the Swanson stuff, the Happ stuff, the Suzuki stuff. I mean, it's exhausting, and it makes it not super fun to watch for me.
Okay.
Sorry.
We got that off.
Right.
No.
I just had to get that off because I've been building up all week watching these games.
We're all super frustrated.
Yeah.
Matt, you brought logic to this problem. We're very frustrated here. Help us understand what did we see this week, and is it just this is the team that they ran back?
It obviously it's a little bit of that. I mean, we know that we were talking about that. Yeah, I was on with you guys before the season started, and we talked about you ended up with very close to the same roster you took into last season. And you're rolling the dice on some players, putting a guy like Christopher Morel at third base and just hoping that works out, right? I think I'm arriving
near third base, I guess. Whether he can get there is a whole other point.
Yeah, whether he can, for instance, charge a slow dribbler and ever record an out on such a batted ball, whether that's possible for him or not, I don't know. Jury's still out. Waiting to see it. I'm sort of arriving at a taxonomy of terror where it is not one thing that is affecting this team. And I've done a few podcasts, not, I hate to ever let you guys know that I am on some other podcast, but I do some of these, and obviously I've been writing a lot, and it's a lot of digesting ideas and realizing, people ask, is Craig Counsell not doing well enough with this team? Probably not, right? They're playing like a tired team, which to me, the sign of a great manager is keeping your team from playing tired, keeping your team sharp, keeping your team, Shota Imanaga was one pitch away from getting out of the 6th inning with a 3-0 lead in San Francisco over the last week. And he didn't. Instead, he gave up the entire lead. And a lot of it was because he's locked into 2 pitches, and he and his catcher can't think a little more creatively and find a way to just fool a pretty foolable hitter in Jorge Soler and escape that jam. And everything snowballs on him. Jamison Tyone gets in trouble in Milwaukee, and he cannot stop the bleeding. I wrote one piece at Northside Baseball that documents he just does not stop the bleeding. He either goes 1, 2, 3, maybe puts one guy on base in an inning, or it ends up being 6, 7, 8, 9 guys come to the plate and they score 2 or 3 runs. There's no in between for him. Those are the kinds of things that good teams do better. They stop that long inning. They turn a double play because they're just a little quicker. I mean, Dansby Swanson, buddy, you got to either charge a half step further on medium hit ground balls or really snap that throw off to Nico Horner, because Nico just does not have that strong an arm. He's not suddenly going to be, name your favorite 80s second baseman who is just lightning fast turning the double play. That's never going to be Nico. It's not who he is. Dansby's got to get him the ball faster, and he hasn't been doing it all year, so they're not turning double plays. And we think a lot about outfield defense as just range, as how many balls can you get to? And all the Cubs outfielders that they've had this year, the 3 who play out there most right now, plus Bellinger, plus Tauchman, these guys can all get to lots of balls. Well, sometimes they also don't get to balls that feel not quite routine, not just the routine ones. We know Seiya dropped some routine ones, But the balls that are just past routine, the balls that are up against the wall, the balls that you have to charge hard, they're just not getting caught. These are all signs of a tired team, and they shouldn't be that tired. So that's on Craig Counsell. But obviously, there's also a shortfall on the roster. There are these gambles they took with guys like Christopher Morel. Can he play third base? Nope. Do we have a good backup plan? Nope. Well, that's on Jed Hoyer.
So you're saying Nick Madrigal's not a good backup plan. Is that because he's hurt or just because he's small? Or is it because he's bad at baseball?
It's, there's got to be an all of the above option on these, right?
Miles Mastrobuoni, not your third baseman of the future?
Yeah, this is the thing. You came in and you said, and honestly, are they even experimenting enough to try to solve that problem at this point? They keep, and I understand because lately Craig Counsell's trying to solve the problem of this outfield that can't catch anything by sliding Suzuki and even Happ sometimes and Bellinger into the DH spots a lot.
Which moves Morel to third.
Right. You can't play Christopher Morel at third then. So Patrick Wisdom has, and I'm not saying Patrick Wisdom's a savior, right? But if there's one thing the Cubs lineup could use a little more of, isn't it that kind of just occasional jolt? And he's not a miserable, untenable defensive third baseman. He's just a little below average, a little above the Morel line.
He looks a lot better than he did last year in the sense that I've seen worse now.
Or he sure would, except you don't really even know what he looks like. I'm forgetting what that man looks like. His handsome visage and everything. He's barely been on the field for the last 3 weeks. I think he started 2 games since June 12th or June 10th even. I mean, because again, Craig's options are very limited. There's a roster construction problem here. There is a clubhouse problem here, whether that goes partially to the roster construction. Do they have the right personalities in that room to light a fire? Justin Steele accepted, whatever. I don't think that actually did anything, but good for him for trying, I suppose. Is Counsell getting enough out of these players? Are the players enough in the first place? And then, they've also just gotten some bad luck, right? I mean, it's very hard for a team that was not built with an elite bullpen in the first place to weather its 3 or 4 best relievers all being hurt for most of the season. Well, that's really tough. So we have to say they haven't had good luck with injuries, position side, starting rotation, bullpen especially. It's everything. And that's why they are where they are. It can't just be one thing, but the fact that it's all of these things probably speaks to the fact that there's multiple levels of problems within the organization that need an active solution.
I worry that's what saves Jed Hoyer's job in all of this, is that they say, without the injuries, we were going to run back an 84-win team. We were going to add Craig Counsell. That's like at least good for 6 more wins.
So the Braves lost Acuna and Strider, perhaps the best the best offensive player, the best pitcher in baseball. And, it's obviously taken a toll on them, but not the kind of toll that keeps you out of the playoffs. I think it speaks to the fact that, Jed did put together a team of interchangeable mediocrity so the injuries really shouldn't be quite the hurdle that they've become.
The Dodgers lost Mookie Betts. If Mookie Betts was on this Cubs team and they lost Mookie Betts, this Cubs team is over. It's done. The Dodgers don't miss a beat. Your point is spot on. It shouldn't be the excuse because they don't have the depth. We were screaming about that this offseason when they didn't get a Jordan Montgomery and they didn't get some of the other pieces that we said you could use more of those guys, and they got no stars. I mean, that's always been something we've complained about.
It feels like they're frozen in time too, where we've been hearing for 4 years now, and certainly before this season, we've got the number 1 farm system in baseball, so we've got young guys that are going to come up and save the day, right? That's been the big mantra. So we can't get a Matt Chapman because we don't want to commit to 2 or 3 years for Matt Chapman. We've got young stars coming up, and it's been like that at every position on the field. And in reality, finally this year, after the failed experiments with Brendan Davis and Caleb Killian and these others, lesser known players, this year the big dog showed up, right? Like Pete Crow Armstrong. We've been talking about that guy for years. In fact, the entire trading deadline situation in 2021, regardless of what happens, we got Pete Crow Armstrong, so that makes it all good. And Pete Crow Armstrong comes up. He's a top 15 player. He's an impact, do everything player. And now I hear people saying, well, I mean, yeah, but he might have an OPS of 500, but he's a rookie, so you got to give him a lot more time. And it's like, look, I get it. The guy's fast. He can steal bases. He can play good, very, very good center field, almost all the time. But boy, I'm really starting to get worried about his offense. And I know he's a rookie. I know he's got 150 or so plate appearances, but the problem is the more plate appearances he gets, the worse he looks. So that's different than somebody who's kind of growing into it. I mean, we're reaching an interesting point where he's having so many non-competitive at-bats where he swings at every pitch that comes, that's thrown in the direction of the play. Even sometimes when the pitcher's like trying to throw a ball like off to the side because it's scuffed or something, he'll take a swing at that. And, we used to laugh at Javier Baez about how undisciplined and uncontrolled he was as a hitter, even as a rookie. Remember, he swung at everything. But you know what? Sometimes he'd hit it. And when he did, he'd hit it like 500 feet. So there was a little bit of consolation prize there. And he did get better, although ultimately not good enough, as it turns out, with the Tigers. And that's a whole other story. But Armstrong's got a lot of work to do. And if that's the guy, he's, like back in the time when Baez was struggling and Schwarber came up and then was great and then he went down and Happ and a lot of these guys, Addison Russell was good, but Chris Bryant was the big dog. He was the guy who came up and was good from the minute he got here, minus that first game we saw when he struck out 3 times. But he was excellent, right off the bat. Pete Armstrong was that guy. He was that guy, allegedly, right? He was our absolute, like, ace in the hole, can't miss prospect. And he misses a lot, usually with the bat in his hand. So I am getting a little bit concerned, and I don't see any other option at this point than to kind of let him try, because you got to know for next year what you got and what you don't have. But it's been a discouraging start, and I don't want to underestimate it and just make excuses like, well, he's just a rookie and it's just 150 plate appearances. He's looking worse than, he's hitting worse than pitchers used to hit, right? And that's something of note.
I think PCA crystallizes a lot of things about where this team is. And to just distill it here down to the straight stuff. PCA during the month of June swung at pitches at a higher rate than Javier Baez has in any month of his career. No time. Now, I want to say one other thing that I think people overlooked throughout. I like to think of myself as the foremost Javier Baez scholar of our time. I think a lot of people overlooked the secret fact that Javi had a pretty darn good hit tool. It was compromised at times by that insane aggressiveness, but his combination of
he could hit strikes,
right, and he also had the ability. Do you remember the sort of flourish swing where it was like the flick of a magician's wand? On 2 strikes, he'd sort of fling the bat at the ball with one hand and send it floating into right field. Javi had these sort of tricks in the bag. He could get away with a very aggressive approach. PCA doesn't have that and has been even more aggressive than Javi Baez. And so I wrote an article, I think it was at the end of last week, maybe over the weekend, about just how insanely swing happy he's gotten.
More so than even in the minors, right? Like he wasn't this bad in the minors.
No, it's even when he first came up this year, it wasn't quite this bad. It's getting worse by the day.
So our eyes are not deceiving us when we say he looks like he's deteriorating.
Exactly. But I got a lot of pushback on that. And on the article that I wrote today that sort of said, so far, and obviously it's too early to make a final judgment, but so far PCA is not a developmental success story for this team. I heard back from a lot of people that said, it's way too early to judge that. Why would we jump to that conclusion? Look how little has happened and look at the tools he is displaying. They're half right. Here's my thing. I just laid out to you something extremely stark. Javier Baez, the symbol of too aggressive at the plate. He's swinging more than that guy ever has. So I've got to ask myself, and everybody should be asking themselves, including the people who work for the Cubs.
Why do they let him do that?
Is this something people aren't successfully identifying? if they are identifying it, what's being said to him to make it stop, and why hasn't it stopped? Either the dude has impulse control problems, like in a baseball sense. I'm not talking about the person, the human being, but he either just can't not swing no matter how much you tell him not to. That's a humongous problem. That's poison. That's sorry, he's not going to hit at this level if that's just how it is. Or someone's not getting in there and saying, dude, you can't swing this much at this level, not with your profile. You're not Luis Arias. You can't touch the ball and line it cleanly to left field over and over. You're going to have to develop an approach. You're going to have to find pitch and drive, wait out the pitches you don't. A walk's as good as a double for you. What are you doing? Either that hasn't been said to him or it's not getting through. Either way, it's terrible news for the Chicago Cubs organization because it means PCA is a bad prospect, a bust, or they're really bad at player development. Like, despite having cycled through how many hitting coaches, I mean, you guys know the litany better than I do, and we're recycling them at this point. And no one's getting through to anyone.
So when Armstrong came up last year at the very end in extremely limited action, right? Mm-hmm. They did bring him in as a pinch runner. They did bring him in defensively in the outfield. But he did feel like his whole game, he felt like he was playing out of control. For the innings he was in there, he'd get thrown out on the bases. He had issues in the outfield even, remember? A couple errors and just a couple bad plays where he was over-aggressive, right? And at the plate, seemed over-aggressive. But I could say, look, he's up here for 2 weeks. It's in a pennant race. It's the major leagues. He was clearly just sort of like the college quarterback who goes to the pros and the game's just faster, right? He was just getting that through. And I'll be honest with you, when he came up this season, I thought, oh, okay, he seems more in control of himself. He certainly is more in control on the bases, much more so. Excellent on the bases, right? Much more in control in the outfield. And even at the plate, he started off and felt like, oh, okay, like I get it. Like, he's got some ability here. What we saw last year in limited action was just sort of an aberration. But as time has gone on, it's gotten worse. And I'm with you, Matt. I don't understand how they can't pull him aside, or maybe they are, and I don't know what's happening. But the player development, we've been hearing a lot about how, once Hoyer got in here and we brought in the pitch lab and all the development we've done in the minors, all these players, are we great at developing players? They got the number 1 farm system, blah, blah, blah. Not much of that has translated at the major league level in the way that you would have thought for as outstanding as our developmental process is.
Another one,
as we're told.
Exactly. Another one of the places that I write is Baseball Prospectus, where they do excellent prospect coverage. And one of the lead prospect writers there, Jarrett Seidler, did a piece, I think it was about a year ago, about whether the industry, the prospect ranking sort of part of baseball, needs to start thinking differently about how they assess teams when it comes to evaluating prospects as players, as individuals. Like, should we be ranking let's just stick to the Cubs. The Cubs have objectively, based on just the raw talent and, projectability and everything, one of the top maybe 5 farm systems in baseball.
And on Cubs Twitter, it's number 1.
Well,
so there you
go. That's a separate problem that goes back quite a few years. But there's also the fact that based on this team's developmental track record, where they just do not turn out successful position players unless they be first-round picks. And even those guys hit their 50th percentile outcome. Not 70th, not 90th, right in the middle. Right?
If PCA could hit his 50th, I'd be ecstatic.
Well,
that's right.
At this point.
Speaking of first-round picks.
We're talking about Ian Happ. We're talking about Nico Horner. These guys are not like soaring beyond what you would have hoped when they were drafted in the first place.
I guess Almora didn't really soar either, huh?
Well, right. I think that's really interesting to say. Yeah, it like adjusted farm system rankings based on your track record of development.
How optimistic am I supposed to be about Matt Shaw, looking at what the Cubs have just done with PCA and the generation of hitters before it? Basically,
other first-round picks, by the way, that the Cubs have on the roster, Nick Madrigal, for example, he was a top 10 pick.
He was.
He actually is having a better season with the bat than Pete Crow Armstrong is. Just if you wanted to put it in some kind of perspective.
It's
Another
almost
one,
bullying at this point.
Thank
Pat.
you. Another first round draft pick of the Cubs, albeit later in the first round, who actually is perceived as a success story. Although I said at the beginning of the year I saw this as a regression candidate, and I've always been a little bit wary. Is Nico Hoerner, and my wariness has always evolved around the fact that he doesn't walk or hit for power, which means that he's got to hit for a high average in order to be valuable as an offensive player. Now, granted, last year he stole a ton of bases and he played great defense. So he was able to certainly have an overall value that was quite significant. But this year we're seeing sort of my worst case scenario, which is, in this day and age, a player can hit 248 and still be a good player. Nico Hoerner cannot hit 248 and still be a good player. And that's, Michael Busch could, right? I mean, even Ian Happ can hit 230 and somehow manage to have value because he's the most clutch hitter of the season, right? Every time he comes up with men on base, he wakes up and hits a double or homer. But leaving that aside, he walks a ton, and by hook or by crook, he hits some home runs too. I mean, so Hoerner's another first round pick who we've got a lot of former first round picks on this team when you add them up together on the offensive side, don't we?
Yeah, well, Jed Hoyer's made sure of that. That's kind of how he does a lot of his shopping, maybe too much.
And Michael Busch, another first round pick, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
So how many is that on the team? Actually, was Cody Bellinger a first round pick?
I don't think he was, but obviously Dansby Swanson was a first overall pick.
Yes.
Bellinger's
a fourth round pick. So you've got on this team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 first round picks at least. That's a fairly impressive position player wise. That's fairly impressive. I mean, in and of itself, minus the production.
You pay for it though. And look, this again is part of the development thing, right? If you only succeed by getting your first round picks into the majors as average-ish players, that's kind of trouble. You'd like to get the odd 8th round pick or $50,000 Latin American signing into the majors. This is the cynical way of looking at it. But those guys, you can get to sign team-friendly extensions and have cost control over. The clock's not ticking on you right away and getting louder and louder by the moment. And you have a base around which to build. It doesn't work that way if you gave a guy $2.5 million at the doorstep of professional baseball.
Well, you made a great point about that with the Brewers, in that we think of the Brewers as being a homegrown team, but really so many of their best players came through trades and were developed, and that their talent was identified, and you can lock them up like a Willie Adames and the Yelich. We don't get into Yelich, but Adames and Contreras and people like that. They've done a good job of mixing that in with the Churios and the Tarangs and others. So you've got a nice balance there of talent.
But they made the trades that the Cubs don't make. The Cubs don't go out and make the trade for the superstar, right? Juan Soto's available, and you aren't even in that conversation. You're not, but you should be.
We couldn't afford to give up Canario. Whatever. I don't know. You tell me, right?
But that's the Brewers went out and got a Yelich who was on the cusp of being a superstar, and he had potential. They saw that
Yelich.
could be our guy.
At Lizzie McNeil's talking about that way back some off season. How about? No, I mean it's true, and the Brewers have gotten have actually developed their own first round picks and their own young talent, like a Churio and a Turang, better so far than the Cubs have done in quite some time. I mean, really, I guess the Cubs sort of shining lights on developmental players would be 7th overall pick Ian Happ and Nico Hoerner, right? I mean, unless you want to count Morel, I guess. I mean, but yeah, I mean,
Morel is another one we should talk about. And, the defense, let's set that aside a minute.
Yeah.
I think it is telling that Christopher Morel came up almost in just a out of need emergency in 2022. Yes, he was off to a good start, but also, the team was sort of just crashing and burning. They were struggling with injuries. He came up, and it was instant crack of power and just a jolt, energy. And so they rode with it. And then they left him down in 2023, tried to get him to smooth some things out. Pretty quickly became clear that was a mistake because the veterans that they chose over him were terrible. And he came up last year and he just raked. I mean, he hit for tons of great power in both of his first 2 seasons in the big leagues. And did that come with rough edges, a really high strikeout rate, some really ugly slumps? Yes. But you come
Which
into
you can
this
afford when a guy's going to hit an average of 40 homers a year, right? I mean, that's the...
And not only the 40 homer, or whatever the
It would have
was,
been if you'd played the whole season up here, yeah.
Something like that. But he also was hitting almost that many doubles and triples together. This year, you brought him in, and it's clear that they worked on some things, and they said, our goal for you is if we can increase your walk rate and decrease your strikeout rate, you're going to go bonanza. You're going to become a super duper star. That's what they believed, and that's what they set about to do. And I guess that, he had the raw talent to, go ahead, give that a shot. Here's the thing. It has extremely not worked. And I've written about this too, that the expected batted ball data and the expected average, his real numbers lagging the expected ones. People can talk about that till they're blue in the face. In his particular
average,
case,
though, man, and the 5 doubles and 1 triple.
Exactly.
I mean,
in his particular case, it's just not real. The balls he is hitting that are outs deserve to be outs. They may be hard hit outs, but for 100 years in baseball, I've watched baseball for 30 years now. I can tell you he hits some of those line drives, and I've seen hitters hit those line drives for 30 years. They're always outs. Yes, they're the ones that frustrate you, but they are.
They stay
out.
up too long. They're soft liners. They're all kinds of things.
It's a process thing. And so it's a question of same thing with Nico Horner. When you go and try to add a little bit of power to his game, you lose some of the contact. You also lose that get on top of it and stroke a clean single through the right side that made him a 300 hitter with a 380 OBP in the second half of last year. That was a really good player.
Yeah.
He didn't hit for power, and he was never going to. And you tried to make him a more conventional, above average, 2024 style big league hitter, and it extremely has not worked. And the same thing is true of Morel. You got this guy who is striking out less. He's walking a little more, not a lot more. Oops, that didn't quite work. And he's given up all but the occasional home run of his power and his ability to hit for average.
Do you find it at all disconcerting that Morel has 5 doubles and 1 triple, and the aforementioned Patrick Wisdom has 4 doubles and 1 triple this season, despite the fact that he plays twice a month?
See, this is why I am occasionally accused, mostly by my own father, of being the president of the Patrick Wisdom fan club. I'm getting closer to just starting the thing, because honestly, let's give the man some opportunity. That what's out there is not working. Now, that's dangerous talk, because last year and even a couple times this year, right? They tried Patrick out in right field.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that. But, he's really not materially different than Christopher Morel right now. That's very bad news.
So let's juxtapose Morel's hard hit, but always out sort of batting situation with that of a Cody Bellinger, who apparently has stopped hitting fly balls altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, other than shallow flies. What's up with that? Like, he's supposed to be the guy who hits the home runs. He can't hit the ball 360 feet.
We were panicked coming into this year when they hadn't re-signed him yet because he was so much of the power last season. And what this lineup looked like without him in it was negative power. There was no home runs were going to be hit at all. So you needed Cody Bellinger to be in the lineup. Now he's here, and the struggles are real. We are in July right now, and this is what we're seeing from Cody Bellinger. What's going on, and is it fixable?
Over the last 3 weeks, he's slugging 281. Slugging 281.
Wow.
Not OBP, not batting average, slugging. You guys, I'm going to start sounding like a jerk saying I wrote about this over and over and over.
This is why I plugged it at the top of the show, because I've read this stuff. I know where this is going. So we have to get people to read it.
What is really interesting is Bellinger. I've said this before. There are two basic ways to hit for power, right? You either hit the ball really, really hard, and sometimes it's up in the air. That's Vladimir Guerrero. Junior, senior, pick your favorite. You hit the ball extremely hard over and over, and it's going to get up in the air enough times for you to pile up lots of doubles and home runs, and you hit for power. The other way is focus on launch angle, and enough of them will be just hard hit enough if you're strong enough, if you're, not everybody has that option, but most hitters who reach the big leagues can. Famously right now, that's guys like Isaac Paredes, Jose Altuve. Most of them are right-handed, sort of stocky, frumpy looking dudes who just hit like 360-foot lob wedges into short porches in left field.
Hey, when the wind's blowing out at Wrigley, that's not the worst strategy, frankly.
No, in theory. But here's the thing. The only way that profile really works consistently is for it to be pull power for you. Nobody can consistently lob that ball at 98 miles an hour the opposite way. Anthony Rizzo did it for a while, but Anthony Rizzo also had plenty of pull power. He was that balanced superstar caliber hitter for a few years.
Baez could hit some opposite field bombs too.
Sure. Again, though, but Javi is very much of the Vladimir Guerrero team.
Yeah, you're right. He hits it so hard that
sometimes it's up in the air.
Boy, if you hit it 500 feet, it really doesn't matter what direction you hit it in, does it, Javi?
Exactly. 115 miles an hour off the bat plays all over, pull to pull. But Cody, as it turns out, is not like those guys. Even though he's built, he's that tall, lanky dude. We've seen him hit 47 homers. You think of him as the guy who can truly mash the ball. He's not. What he is at this stage of his career, at least, is like a stretched out and mirror flipped version of Isaac Paredes. He needs to loft the ball to the pull field over and over. He hits it just hard enough to get it out a reasonable amount of the time by hitting it that way. Well, over the last few weeks, even that's gone missing, and we'll get to that in a second. But I think the big problem that he ran into even starting 2 months ago is that the thing is that never really fit Wrigley Field well. You guys go way back. We all know this. The ball doesn't fly to right center at Wrigley. It doesn't. First of all, the fence is subtly shaped differently. It says 368 to right center and left center, but that 368 sign is further over towards center and left than it is in right. And the wall bends out more steeply toward right center than it does to left. It's flatter there. So you got to hit it further, and you got to hit it without as much assistance from the airflow if you're hitting it to right center. That's why Billy Williams is the last person to hit 40 homers as a lefty at Wrigley Field. Bellinger has run into the problem that the ball's just not carrying for him. It's not going out, and I don't know what adjustments he tried to make.
Wasn't the argument last year that he had his, when they looked at exit velocity and they looked at how hard he was hitting the ball, that he wasn't hitting the ball as hard as he had in the past. But the theory was, with two strikes or whatever, when it's situationally, he was taking some of the power off to get hits, because the balls are falling in for hits, and the thought was that, well, he's sacrificing power to get on base, and get base hits. And so coming into this season, because that was one of the concerns, but coming into this year, figured, well, if he can, has that figured out, maybe that's not the worst thing to hit the ball hard when you want to, but not when you don't. But it doesn't seem like he can do it at all now, even if he would want to, even in situations where you would want to.
Right. Last year, it was a little more true. And one thing about these, when you see a hard hit rate on Marquee likes to use that stat now, and it's on Baseball Savant, it's on a lot of the popular sites. Usually they're using as the denominator in that equation batted balls, which is tricky if you're a guy like Cody and like several others who will cut down and just try to make contact in 2 strike counts. That drags down, that's increasing the denominator, but probably not increasing the numerator, because you're not going to hit it 95 miles an hour very often, just flicking the bat at it with 2 strikes. Last year, there was a marked difference there. And if you just took hard hit batted balls as a percentage of all plate appearances, Cody did a little better.
Yeah, he hit more balls, period. So.
Right. This year, that's gone. The power is just sapped. Now, his swing speed, we have bat tracking metrics now. We don't have him for last year, so we can't draw a direct comparison here. But looking at sort of how it's mapped over this season, his swing speed is below average all the time. That's fine. That's part of being like that Isaac Paredes, Jose Altuve guy. You don't have to swing as hard as other people if what you're doing is getting slightly under it, that, the ball's coming slightly down, so I'm going to meet it coming slightly up, the Ted Williams thing, right? The problem is when you look at how often he's squared up the ball, how often he's actually met it on that direct attack angle that you want, that's read like an EKG this year. Highs and lows. And he's in like a 3-week trough lately where he's just not meeting it solidly. So it's not about his bat slowing down and, oh no, he's lost forever. But he is in a serious funk of just not being able to find the connection between the line of his barrel and the plane of the incoming pitch. That's something that you should be able to fix. It's basically a slump, and he should come out of it. But now we're back to the same thing with PCA. Why hasn't anyone told PCA don't swing 63% of the time? Well, why hasn't anyone found a way to at least once or twice in the last 3 weeks get Cody to line up on one and hit the ball 350 feet?
Three less than successful weeks for the team. So with the Cubs' luck, Bellinger will continue on this path for another month. And then after the trade deadline passes, he'll go on a tear and hit like 15 home runs the last 2 months and then opt out of his contract, right? Is that what we're looking at?
I mean, I think you're saying that like it's the worst case scenario, but I
guess the worst case scenario is he doesn't do it at all, and then we'll see him in spring trading, right?
Yes, he opts right into that $30 million.
Yeah,
exactly.
Is there a chance that a team sees what you're saying there, Matt, and has interest in calling the Cubs and are willing to take on that potential? It's a very player-friendly deal with that $30+ million option. Is that something that is a team could say is fixable enough with our the hubris of our coaching staff to say we see what it is, we can address it, and we can get another potential great performance and maybe another year of Cody Bellinger? Maybe he opts out.
Yeah, I do think that there's probably a team out there going, we can still work with this. But for the same reason that the Cubs won the bidding this winter, and adding now the fact that the deal the Cubs signed him to is fairly complicated and extremely player friendly, just because 2 different options, both his and not the team's to decide on. That's going to make it hard to move him, right? I don't think that's any secret.
I guess if you're the Cubs and you're not going to compete this year and maybe not even next year, you say, look, we'll pay for the rest of this year's salary, every penny. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we'll even commit to paying, I don't know, $10 million of next year's salary if he opts in with your team. In exchange, we want a better prospect for this year, and then triggering with his opting in for you, we want to choose from another list of names or whatever. I mean, there could be some creative way. I mean, not that the Cubs leadership
Which
is
front office is this? Wait a second.
Interested in that, and Ricketts would be like, wait a minute, so we're not getting anything out of this? Like I have to pay for this still? But ultimately, like a big market team would look at that as an opportunity to try to leverage their financial advantages to improve the prospects they would get back, I would think.
You're not wrong. Definitely paying, the ability to, I think Bellinger maybe has net positive value. It's tough because those 2 options will make teams a little uneasy,
Sure.
A little more so than, teams like to have optionality. They don't like when the player has optionality over them. But I think that one probably still has a net positive value. I'm more confident than most, pretty darn confident, that Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki have net positive value contractually. And I don't even know that the Cubs would balk at, paying down that actual salary. It's the other things that will make it hard for them to get the, we've seen how Jed Hoyer operates. He didn't trade Wilson Contreras, not because, not for really any reason other than he didn't feel like what he was being offered was actually worth Wilson Contreras.
You'd rather have the 68th pick in the draft.
Exactly. And so if Hoyer stands on principle that way, and this is why Jed Hoyer didn't trade for Juan Soto. This is why Jed Hoyer hasn't made lots of trades over the last
Is
several
this why
years.
he cut Kyle Schwarber and got nothing in return? Oh, wait,
Kinda.
sorry.
Yeah, it's an insistence on value. He's not going to lose transactions, and
Or
think,
win them, apparently, but go ahead.
That's the flip side.
I think the team can advance by making trades that are gonna feel underwhelming in their return, because I just don't think, again, I've written about this, I don't think Seiya Suzuki and Ian Happ work as your two corner outfielders in the current build of this team.
Right. With those no trade clauses, by the way, it might be a little bit trickier, but
that's what I'm saying is, so the teams that you're trading with aren't going to mind taking on those contracts, and you can even offer to pay down those contracts and try and get a better return in the process if you're trading to a medium or small market team.
But I feel like you're presuming that they're going to actually be sellers. Is that have you already given up? I mean, this is breaking news. Have you given up on this season?
Absolutely. The 2024 Cubs aren't good and can't be. Yeah,
and they're not going to get.
I should have led with that, I guess.
No. It should be assumed. We're just
7 games under 500, and I believe if you were to say, well, they should be sellers, Jed Hoyer would say, well, and his group would say, well, look at the Arizona Diamondbacks last year. They made the playoffs by 1 game, and they went to the World Series.
No, there's a whole list of teams. I tweeted something out yesterday about teams that have gone, as the Cubs now have, 22-37 over a 59-game stretch at any point in the season and gone on to make the playoffs. The 2014 and 16 Giants, well, one of those teams won the World Series.
Yeah, 2016 was a darn good team, and they just ran into the buzzsaw of the Cubs. I mean, that first series was a lot more white-knuckled than...
It was scary, yeah.
That Johnny Cueto game 1, was a lot scarier than people seem to remember.
Yeah.
The Chris Bryant game in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the 2005 Astros went to the World Series. And
and then they gave up. I think they might have actually thrown the World Series. But anyway, that's a whole nother story.
And if Jed Hoyer is listening this deep into this podcast,
as we know he does,
then surely he's scribbling down those team names because he wants to be able to quote that stuff too.
Yeah.
And just yesterday, Sunday, in Milwaukee, they were, reporters talked to him because he was traveling with the team, and he basically said, we just have to be really good in July, or we will have to entertain selling. Well, okay, so they're keeping the door open to possibly even buying, certainly standing pat.
Well,
I think that would be a colossal mistake.
I think they have 2 weeks to pretend whatever they want to pretend, right? Like, I mean, the next 2 weeks until the All-Star game, they can keep pretending. They can talk about Arizona from last year. The difference.
I don't need Hoyer to come out and say they're
right. And by the way, just for people listening, the difference between the Cubs this year and Arizona last year, and it's a small difference, but I think it's worth pointing out, is that this Cubs team is 7 games under 500 on July 1st. The Arizona Diamondbacks were 16 games over 500 on July 1st last year.
Yeah.
It took like a colossal 9-game losing streak for them in August for them to fall down. And then they recovered, and they lost the last 4 games of the season.
They only made the playoffs because this other team that was vying for the wild card spot totally collapsed in September.
Yeah, they beat the Cubs 8 times. You're welcome.
6 over 500, right? So it wasn't like they were 500 or anything like that. I mean, so the Cubs are 12 games behind where Arizona ended up. But Arizona, it's a lot easier when you have a big lead and you give it away, and then you kind of get it at the end, as opposed to having to claw your way back for 3 full months, I think.
And the Cubs have 7 teams ahead of them in the wild card standings.
Right.
And
for the last wild card.
For the last wild card, you have to pass 7 teams.
Yeah. Of which they have they're going to have the tiebreaker against 0 at the rate they're going. I mean,
by the way, that's for the privilege of going and playing a best of 3 at probably American Family Field, which is not a place the Cubs are going to win 2 out of 3 if recent history is any kind of guide. And it's just, to me, the third wild card doesn't exist. If I were running a team, which God help that team, but if I were running a team, you would never hear me make any illusion, because It's there. And of course, I will send my team to play in it if that's what we end up winning. But you cannot be aiming for that ever, ever, ever. I don't see any virtue in making the playoffs if there's a perfectly good chance you'll never even play a home game in those playoffs. You should not be aiming for that. You shouldn't even be aiming for the second wild card. If you're not a good enough team to try and win your division or aim for that first wild card, you should make small moves at the margins, maybe, and sort of stand pat and see what happens. The Cubs aren't even that. And so they should be aggressively selling, not only because they're not good this year, but because this is the same team we saw be not very good last year. So and a lot of them are the same from the year before that. And it's just, this team's not getting younger. This team's not getting.
But we've had that sad discussion, by the way.
Yeah. So
about the age creep of the 30-year-olds and 31-year-olds this year.
So don't you have to then, if you're Tom Ricketts, you have to make a decision on Jed Hoyer's situation, because if Jed Hoyer's your guy, then he can do the tear down and sell off of this. But if he's not your guy,
they're never going to call it a tear down. But the real question, Jeremy, that you're alluding to is it a tinker where they get rid of a couple pieces like they trade in Ian Happ? Or are we talking about trading Justin Steele, Ian Happ, and Nico Horner, and really just kind of like,
do you let Jed do that, or do you save some of those pieces for the next guy to work with to try to mold a team into
Carter?
Their vision?
Just kidding.
We've circled all the way down to the darkest part of my Cubs nihilism at this point, because here's my thing, and you guys know this organization at least as well as I do, so I want to hear your thoughts on it too. I'm just not sure the Ricketts family, I don't get the sense that they're like about to fire Jed because they're frustrated by what's happening. I'm not sure they're frustrated by what's happening. I'm not sure how much they care.
This is my point 100%, is we don't know what Jed's performance metrics are. If it's keep us under the luxury tax and keep the ballpark over 30,000, he's doing a great job, and he's not going anywhere.
I think that in reality, though, the Ricketts would say, no, this isn't good enough. We want you to do better without going over the luxury tax, right? We want to play some home games in the playoffs, but we don't want to spend a penny over the luxury tax. And they'll just point at everybody else in the division who's not over the luxury tax, who's better than us. But they're not willing to guarantee the playoffs the way, say, the Dodgers would, or the Yankees would, or the big teams would, by actually spending enough money so that even if you have injuries or even if something goes wrong, you're still good enough, right? They want to thread the needle, but always do it successfully, which I think is a fool's errand. But I think that's probably in their ultimate goal.
So there are two problems with that, right?
Well, there are at league 2 problems with that, Matt.
Yeah, you can count them however you want. One is that the rule set is stacked against a big market team succeeding that way.
Yes.
Right? The Dodgers aren't spending $300 million a year because they're out of good ideas. The Dodgers have more good ideas than the Cubs, and they're spending $350 million a year. Why? Because the CBA gives many of their competitors, not
more
all
picks.
of them, like the Cubs are in the situation of, but gives many of their competitors extra draft picks.
And if you thought the 68th pick in the draft was really important when you kept Contreras, just imagine if you do that, everybody else in your division gets a comparable pick for doing nothing,
And so that's one big problem. The other one is we're years into this now, man. Yeah. And now I want to give Jed Hoyer some credit. And there are multiple things Jed Hoyer has done well. I think we get too hard on him when things are bad, maybe. But one thing he definitely did well was go in and overhaul the especially amateur, but really the whole scouting department. And the last couple drafts have looked a lot better. I was even very wrong about that 2022 draft class, which now looks pretty good.
So we think that the drafts are better, but the question is going to be whether the player development matches the drafts, right?
And so here's the problem. Can you throw out the bathwater but not the baby? If you decided this isn't good enough, Jed's not meeting the thresholds we need, we don't want to spend $280 million a year, so we need a GM who's more creative, and we'll put together a more efficient organization top to bottom to compete with the Brewers on a regular basis.
Which is the
ongoing
saddest
basis.
statement I've ever heard, by the way.
I know.
No offense.
But in fairness, I want to say, too, people
The Brewers
are...
have done a great job. I get it.
Exactly.
But it's sad that you have to, like...
Yes.
You have to say it that way, like, because the Cubs can still spend $100 million more than the Brewers, not go over the luxury tax, and do all those things. Like, this is like they've got extra money to play with over the rest of the teams in their division, and yet we say it like it's aspirational as opposed to required.
If you want that organization that can be more efficient and outstrip the Brewers on a regular basis, can you fire Jed Hoyer and replace someone you're confident will do those more creative trades, go find the guy that no one knows is available and get him, and then make him even better. Do that kind of stuff while still keeping the good things that have come along here. Like, can you keep having draft classes that impress people? And a year later, even if that player never gets converted to an actual successful regular, 2 years on, Cade Horton has way more value as a trade chip than he had the day he was drafted. Matt Shaw's stock has risen in just under a year. Like, can you keep having those success things moving in the right direction while switching out a lot of personnel and a lot of the things that aren't working? That is a little bit hard to do, and it might be what's paralyzing the Ricketts. I hope that that's kind of what's paralyzing the Ricketts as opposed to apathy. But Jeremy,
maybe Dallas Green could come back. He did draft Maddox in the second round, and Moyer, I think, in the fourth or fifth round of the same draft.
Sure. I mean, if he's available.
I think he's like 120, so I don't know if that's going to work. But
well, I think we've talked at length about the 2024 Cubs. This is all we can discuss at this point here as of July 1st. More to come, of course, as this all-important July, as Jed Hoyer says, rolls on. Tough week ahead. 3 against Philadelphia, and then 3 at home against the Angels.
Cubs are lucky. The Phillies are beaten up, and the Angels suck. Like, this should not be a tough week. Right? I mean, really, they're 6 home games against a team that's we caught at the perfect time, and another team that you can catch whenever you feel like it because they're terrible.
Catch whenever you feel like it,
and you're gonna have a packed house, and there's not going to be a single Los Angeles of California Angels fan at the entire place all weekend, right? It's going to be all Cubs fans. This is a week when you've got 6 games, and regardless, you should go 4-2 this week. I mean, you're at home. You can't do it now. When are you going to do it? Sorry.
This is a 2-4 week for me. I think I don't have any confidence. I have no confidence that they're not going to get stomped by
then again,
an injured
Wisniewski
Phillies
starting
team.
2 of the games, and Hendricks is starting 1 of the games. So I don't know. Like, maybe you're right, Jeremy. But still, like, look, the next 2 weeks before the All-Star break, I do think, to your earlier point, these are the weeks when the Cubs can really sort of chart their destiny. And if they go even 8-5, probably not good enough, right? They're still going to be 4 games under 500 after the break. Because after these games, they've got 3 at the Orioles, and then I think 4 at St. Louis, right? So even if they went, and this is the depressing part, they have this 13-game stretch. Even if they go 8-5, because they just went 3-7 in their last 10 games, you're now talking about a 23-game stretch where they're still playing under 500, even though they went 8-5 during the next stretch against good teams, right? So it is going to be tough. They're going to really have to do like 4-2, 5-1, 5-2. Like, you're going to need weeks like that the next couple of weeks to give, I think, anybody confidence of even staying pat, right? Let alone buying at this point, or otherwise you're just in sell mode, because as bad as the rest of the teams above them seem to be, there's, like you said, Jeremy, there's 7 of them that are above them fighting for the last spot in an expanded playoff system. So, if this were the old days and you had 1 wild card, we would be trading. We'd be ready to trade today, right? I mean, Matt already is, but I mean, objectively, there'd be no hope whatsoever. The fact that they let half the league into the playoffs and we're still 7th place for the last spot. I mean, it'd be like Rockies fans sitting around saying, well, we could still make the playoffs. Look, I mean, that's how absurd this feels, a lot of it. And yet,
isn't it just the Marlins and the Rockies the Cubs are ahead of?
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct. Yeah.
That says a lot right there.
The Expos, right?
I-
They're defunct. They don't have an Expos anymore, so I put them below us. But like, if you can in the next 2 weeks pass the Reds and the Nationals or a couple of these teams and feel like, okay, we're only like 3 games out, although we still have to pass 5 teams, then I think I think Matt's right. I think you're just fooling yourself. You might be fooling yourself anyway, but you're super fooling yourself then.
You guys left me a nice little lane. 2-4, 4-2. I'm just going to say they go 3-3 this week, and
Perfect.
I think that'll be
3-3 is a sell.
Yeah, yeah. No, and again, I think I wrote this last time I'm saying it on this episode. It was in the article that led the site today. I think what happened this weekend in Milwaukee was the best thing that could have happened to this team, because they're not good. They're not going to be good with this set of personnel, and they needed not Justin Steele shouting it, but they needed the other team, the team that really owns this division, to send a wake-up call and say, you need to go get a whole lot better. And that means some what Chet Hoyer will euphemize as hard decisions need to be made in the month of July.
So the Cubs are 11.5 behind the Brewers right now. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
They have 3 games left in July, third week of July against the Brewers. If the Cubs fail to sweep that series, they lose the tiebreaker. So then, even if they win 2 out of 3, you're still 11.5 back in essence, because you don't win the tiebreaker. It's just the math just runs out on you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Also, and this again, math is math. The Brewers are a really good team, you guys.
Yeah.
The Brewers their starting pitching has been torn to shreds by injuries and was thin already because they.
And Peralta's having a down year, and yet here we are.
Yeah. So their starting pitching is one thing. They have a phenomenal bullpen.
Their ace closer's been out the entire season.
Insane lineup depth, and they play tremendous defense, and they are like the Cubs, but with fewer stupid outs on the bases. Just crazy aggressive, but in a good way.
And
Paul
Churio kid is looking good. Churio's 20 years old, and he's looking better and better.
Yeah. He needed 2 months to settle in, because that's what happens when you get called up to the majors 3 weeks after your 20th birthday.
Yeah.
But he is now crushing, and I don't think that's like a blip. I watch these players every day for both teams.
He's a top 5
I also run BrewerFanatic.com.
Yeah.
This is not a mirage. This is not an accident. The Brewers haven't gotten materially more lucky than the Cubs. Like you said, they're missing Devin Williams. They've also had this insane string of starting pitcher injuries. And they just debuted tonight Garrett Mitchell, an outfielder who's missed the entire season for them up to this point.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten luckier. They're just a whole lot better.
Jeremy, is that true?
Should get everyone eager to see the Cubs retool. And thank goodness that these last 5 years weren't a rebuild. Otherwise, it'd be awfully frustrating that we're staring at a rebuild right now.
Yeah, Paul Noonan scared us straight last week when we dove deep into the Brewers preview, and they're good. Pat, we need to talk about another good team. Let's cleanse our palate and talk about the 1984 Chicago Cubs, as we do every week here. It's the 40th anniversary of the 1984 team, so we're celebrating them by looking week by week, and boy, as this season rolls on, it'll be way more interesting than what we're talking about with the 2024 team.
So last week we talked about the Sandberg game, which occurred on that fateful Saturday in June 23rd, or whatever it was. The Cubs in the following week went 5-3, fairly decent filling. But of interesting note, they started the week. So the Sandberg game's on a Saturday, and everybody remembers what a great game that was. What people don't remember is what happened on Sunday. Sunday was Rick Sutcliffe's second start as a Cub, where he proceeded to blank the Cardinals 5-0, 5-hit shutout, 14 strikeouts. Got a nice game score of 90, for that. Just a dominant start, which improved his record to 2-0 as a Cub starter. Spoiler alert, it was going to get better, but it was just one of those moments where it's like, oh, well, isn't it nice to have an ace pitcher like that, especially following a game that went into extra innings where you had to use a lot of, a lot more relievers than you might have wanted to otherwise. So it was definitely worth noting that he was on his game. And then later in the week, the Cubs played the Dodgers at LA, which has always been tough for them. And the Cubs won 3 out of 4, which is also a big week. Rick Sutcliffe lost his one and only game of the season later that week. But don't worry, because at 2-1, things would only improve for him for the rest of the way. But the interesting part about the Cubs back then, because the narratives as we look back and reflect, it's like this teleological trap where we say, well, this was the year of Sandberg this, Sandberg that. You know who the big player of June was for the Cubs? Wasn't Sutcliffe, he just got there. Wasn't Sandberg. It was this guy, Sports Illustrated cover man, Leon Durham, who was having a monster season with the Cubs, which was important because, as we talked about in the Sandberg game, the Cubs traded their ace closer, Bruce Sutter, in a deal to acquire, among others. Leon Durham was sort of the centerpiece, the young first baseman. He had a lot of faith in. They also got Ken Reeds, who didn't work out, who's a third baseman who just started sucking the minute he got here. But Leon Durham was the big bat at the time, and he was just having a phenomenal season. So he was the first Cub of the year to make the cover of Sports Illustrated. So there you go. And they have an article on the Cubs, and it's kind of an interesting.
If you're watching on the YouTube channel, that's where Pat is showing you the actual visual of the Sports Illustrated. Go ahead and show.
It's called A Family Feud in Philadelphia, and it was about the fact that the Cubs, as we've discussed several times, were Dallas Green, who had come from Philadelphia. They were just trading players back and forth. Whenever one team needed something and they had extras, they would just give. The Cubs made a trade a couple years before. First of all, the Sandberg trade obviously is the big one we all remember because the Cubs got Boa and Sandberg and gave up Avante Jesus. But I forgot the Cubs had given up Mike Krukow and gotten Keith Moreland in return like the year before that. And the spring training, the Cubs got Matthews and Dernier for Bill Campbell because Dernier was just sitting on the bench. And they talk about that in the article about how the Phillies players, first of all, every Phillies player loved Gary Matthews, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Sarge, they loved him. And they, throughout this whole article, they talk about it. And they're all, the first time the two teams met, which was this week, they were, hanging out with them and shaking his hand and coming over to the Cubs dugout and whatnot before the games. They were also super happy for Dernier that he was actually getting a chance to play because he'd been a bench player in Philadelphia. Maybe it was a different era in baseball. I suppose it was in some respects, but there just seemed to be this general affinity amongst the two teams because half the players in these games had played for the other team at one point. Manny Trio had been a Cub, and he was so. I mean, you had like 5 starters on one team and 4 on the other that had come from each other. Not to mention the pitchers. So there was a lot of positive, and it wasn't in a negative way either. There was just a lot of positive vibes between the two teams, and it got me to thinking about the current situation. It's like if only the Cubs had a guy in the front office who had come from another team where they could like leverage these relationships and the knowledge of the other team's farm system, say, I don't know, the Cleveland Guardians or something. If only they had somebody from there, like if Carter Hawkins had only come from somewhere other than, Mars or wherever they got him from. Wouldn't it be nice if you could start making deals with a former team that, or maybe a team that like Jed Hoyer had some relationships with, although it's been so long now for him, I guess it doesn't matter. But it was just nice to see them kind of work in this cooperative manner, even though, mind you, they're in the same division, in the same league, when only one team from your division even makes the playoffs. So, I mean, there's that going on, but they definitely, and Dallas Green really picked them clean, as it turns out. I mean, the Cubs really, and look, the Phillies were a loaded team, and they had their own vision going. Even so, I think objectively, when you look back on it over time, the Cubs did really well there. And so, yeah, it makes you wonder, is there any way the Cubs could do that now? Apparently not. But it sure would be nice, especially with a team like the Guardians that has a lot of interesting, players in their other team and in their farm system. But here we are instead, kind of meandering around, not sure what we're going to do. But it's definitely worth reading. If you get the June Sports Illustrated here, you can read about them Cubbies. I will note sort of there is an anecdote later in the magazine in the baseball part where pitcher Dennis Eckersley was interviewed. He had come over from the Cubs in that Red Sox trade for the near Hall of Famer Bill Buckner. And so Eckersley, when traded to the Cubs, remember there was no DH in the National League. It was the first time he'd ever been in the National League. He says, quote, "My arms are killing me. My back's killing me." This is about batting practice. He was in tremendous pain. First game, he goes out, he goes 0 for 2, ground out on a strike on his first 2 at-bats. He said, "I don't feel that good." And then the next game, his second game as a major leaguer, he got a base hit. So already he was more valuable than Miguel Amaya in just his second game as an offensive threat. And then there's one other sort of Cub-related anecdote. Do you remember Dave Kingman, Cub home run great, hit the 48 homers and was an all-star? Kingman played for like 7 different teams. He was pretty mercurial. He was known for getting into arguments with the press. Although at one point in time, he did have the record for the most home runs for a player never to make the Hall of Fame. I think it was like 435 or something before the steroid era kind of, threw that sort of away. But he was with Oakland at the time. And he had an incident on a Monday when Kingman, who was leading the league with 14 home runs, by the way, in the first 2 months of the season. So, typical Kingman. He was ejected by first base ump Steve Palermo because he disagreed with Palermo's call on a check swing appeal. He said, quote, "Tell Palermo he's got the worst case of bad breath I've ever seen. He's got to cut down on the garlic," Kingman said after the game. So the next day, Kingman singles in his first at bat, and 20 feet out of the box, he turns to yell at Palmeiro, who was at that point the first base ump. And at the same time he stumbled and fell, he got up and made it to first base, but it turns out he tore a ligament in his left knee, turning to mock the umpire for whom he was called out on a check swing the day before. So there you go. Baseball in the 80s. You can't beat it. So
yeah.
Well, we needed that palate cleanser.
Then when he tore a ligament in your knee, he was only out for 1 week. So because they didn't really use the ligaments weren't that strong back then.
I was going to say, if you ever watched Dave Kingman play defense, the knee ligaments weren't important.
Yeah. Really. Imagine if they'd had a DH in the National League. My goodness. Anyway, so that's what was going on in the world of baseball and the world of the Cubs at this time in 1984.
Awesome stuff. Matt Trueblood, thanks for coming on and helping us unpack all the feelings of this past week. And remind everyone again where they can find your work on the internet and follow you on X/Twitter.
Northsidebaseball.com and at MA Trueblood on Twitter.
At Wrigleyville Nat for all of our socials. And of course, we just mentioned the YouTube channel. We are so close to getting over the 100 subscriber mark for the YouTube channel we just launched. So we want to continue that push. If you haven't gone there, please go there, throw us a subscribe, even if you don't consume your podcast in video fashion. Totally fine. It helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. And continue to tell your Cub fan friends about the audio version of the podcast as well. We love those subscriptions and comments. We read every single one and appreciate everybody there. And of course, patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation is how we continue to stay ad-free. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for joining us, Pat.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.